Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Woodland Wildlife webinar presentation, Hunting Leases, Associated Liability, and Appropriate Insurance. My name is Andrew Kling. I'm a Forestry Program Assistant with the Western Maryland Research and Education Center at the University of Maryland Extension in Washington County. We're here today to tell you a few things about hunting leases. And we'll be hearing from Jonathan Kays and Tom Skaggs. Jonathan Kays with the University of Maryland Extension and Tom Skaggs with the Outdoor Underwriters Incorporated. But before we get started, before we turn things over to them, we have a few things to talk about. Make sure everyone's on the same page. The webinars that we do here are part of a series. We're having the last one of the spring today, and then we'll pick it up again in the fall. The easiest way to keep in touch with us and find out what all we have scheduled is to join our webinars email notification list. Send an email to listserv@listserv.umd.edu, or you can contact me directly at akling1@umd.edu. What we do is we send out the information about our webinars, tell people when we're going to be having them and what the particular topic is, and then a couple days before the actual program starts, we'll send out information on the connection information, let you know when to log on and where to log on. And we try to encourage people to do that 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time to make sure that everyone logs on. We're limited by bandwidth to the first 100 people to join us. So it's a first-come, first-serve operation. And if you don't get a chance to join us, if you know someone who would be interested in seeing this but couldn't make it today, you can always refer them to our YouTube channel, because we do record the webinars. And go to the YouTube channel called Woodland Wildlife Webinar, and that's where you'll find this recording, probably after July 1st, and all of the others we've had in this series. And we also post them on our website, and if you've spent a little bit of time with some of us before, you may have seen this website for the Forest Stewardship Education Program. This website is no longer being updated. In fact, we've changed our name slightly to the Woodland Stewardship Education Program. It's the same group of people, Nevin Dawson, Nancy Stewart, and Bob Jaden, Jonathan Kays, and myself. We're all doing the same thing. We've just rebranded ourselves slightly. And we did that to bring in the new website as well. It's all part of a rebranding by the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources. So all of the AGNR programs have this same look with the University of Maryland's colors of black and red. And if you go to this site and go over to the right-hand side under Resources, you'll see a listing for webinar recordings, and that's where you'll find all of the different webinar recordings that we've had over the past spring. And you can join them, listen to them, and figure out if any of them are interested, and if anyone else you know would be interested as well. Now, as we go along today, if you have a question, the easiest way to get a hold of us is to type in the chat box on the lower left-hand corner. We'll try to get to the questions during the presentation if possible. If not, there is usually some time at the end of the program where people can ask questions. And if we somehow miss your question and we don't get to it during the program, you may want to remind us towards the end, and we can get back to it again. And if for some reason we miss it entirely, please drop me a line. Email me at akling1@umd.edu, and we will get the answer back to you as soon as we can. Now, before we get started, we have a little bit of demographic work to do to figure out who's joining us today. A few poll questions. These don't take very long. And if you would go ahead and give us the feedback to these questions. Tell us where you live, and if you... Oh, sorry, here. I'm having trouble getting some of these opened. There we go. Just have to make the windows a little bigger. My idea of making things all nice and coherent, I guess, didn't work. I was trying to minimize the tiles, but go ahead and give us some feedback on this, and we will let you give us some feedback on those. Make sure that we've gotten everyone's information, and then we will move on. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the first poll, and it looks like we've gotten everyone's feedback on those. Okay, we're still getting some feedback here. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the fifth one. How many acres of land do you own? And then we'll close the last one in a minute here. Okay, now I'm going to move on. I'm going to bring in Jonathan Kays here, who'll tell you a little bit about some of the information you need to know. And there's Jonathan there, and he's going to give you some background, and then we'll turn things over to Tom in just a little bit.
Welcome. I'm Jonathan Kays. I'm an extension specialist with the University of Maryland. I'm going to do the first part of this program to give a little background on hunting leases or landowner liability in the state of Maryland. And basically a lot of what I'm going to discuss is in a publication we have called Recreational Access Landowner Liability. It's available online at our extension website, and I would encourage you to take a look at this. With regards to recreation, there's all kinds of recreation. Fishing, hunting, could be just hiking, horseback riding, you name it. There's a lot of interest, but people are concerned about understanding their rights and how do they exercise them to control recreational use of their property, and what is their extent of the liability to those recreationalists. There's also questions about posting and controlling trespass, and specifically what we're going to talk about today, how do I charge for recreational access and still provide liability protection. There's some things we're not going to address here, but a lot of these issues are covered in the publication, so I'd encourage you to read that for more information on those other topics. Well, we are going to talk about liability, and liability is kind of a three-pronged issue. Many people's perception of liability is that they are very liable for people coming on their property, and the reality is, in many cases, that liability is fairly limited, as we'll see, especially if you don't charge a fee. And many times liability is just used by landowners if they just don't want somebody coming on their property. They say, I just don't want to be liable, and that's it. What we know, what the rule of law about liability really descends from English law. Before I go any further, I think it's important for me to say that I am not a lawyer. I'm a forester, so that it's always important to get good advice from legal counsel or from an insurance agent, person like Tom, who will be speaking after me. But I did want to give you some background, which I think will help in this discussion that he puts forth. The liability really that you have for people on your property depends on the status of that person, the visitor. And there's a duty of care that's owed depending upon the status of that visitor. So if a person comes on your property without permission, they're considered a trespasser. And we'll understand what that means. But if they come on with permission, they could be either a licensee or an invitee. And there are different duties of care owed to those individuals as well. So with regards to a person, an invitee, this is like a business relationship. And when you get into a charging for hunting or any type of recreational access, it's a business relationship. They're specifically invited, they pay a fee, and you have a very high duty of care to those individuals on your property. And you need to seek out, discover, correct, prevent dangerous conditions, and to warn people. And can usually be found liable for just negligent acts on your part. So there's a very high duty of care for these types of individuals coming on your property. The next level down would be a person who's a licensee. And this has your permission to be on the person has your permission to be on the property, but there's no particular benefit. In many cases, there's no money, but this might be the case where you invite somebody to come on your property to hunt or something like that. And there's no duty to warn and correct hazards, but there is a little bit higher level of a duty of care owed to these people. And the third status is that of a trespasser, and that's a person who enters or remains on the property without the permission of the owner. And to these individuals, the landowner owes little or no duty to seek out, discover, or correct unsafe conditions. So a person can be a trespasser, a licensee, or an invitee. And there's an increasing duty of care owed to those individuals. If you're an invitee and there's a business relationship, usually you can find liable for simple negligence, failure to exercise ordinary or reasonable care. And for these other ones, like trespassers, and typically it's willful or malicious damage. And malicious damage is somewhat obvious. Now, you're purposely trying to hurt somebody who's on your property and they had an injury as a result. And willful, typically sometimes known as gross negligence, I think in some states, falls somewhere between that. And the issue you might see here is that there's a problem because the status of the visitor and the duty of care can change in each situation. So, for example, if a person's a trespasser, that's one thing. If you invite them on the property, there may be a higher duty of care owed to that person. And in case of an invitee, that would probably be fairly obvious. But the point here is that it creates little incentive for landowners to allow recreationalists to enter on the property. And this was kind of recognized as a problem many years ago, back in the 50s and 60s. This whole issue of liability and, the status of the visitor, did I invite the guy on the property, didn't I, this and that. And that was really the basis for the creation of the recreational statute in Maryland, as well as it was accepted pretty much in all states, but there's nuances to it in different states that you need to know about what the nuances are in your state. But the purpose is to encourage the owners of land to make land available for recreational and educational purposes by limiting the landowner's liability. And the conditions under which that is done is that it makes all visitors considered trespassers. And if you remember, a person is a trespasser, you owe little or no duty to seek out, discover, or correct unsafe conditions. So a very low duty of care owed to these individuals. The caveat here, though, is that this only applies if no fee is charged. So, and it covers the entire range of recreational and educational activities, but again, it only applies if no fee is charged. So this recreational statute was a great thing for landowners because it gave them some assurance of protection and liability, minimal liability for people on their property. One of the issues that was raised over the years is what is a charge? And a charge is a fee for services or things like that. But many landowners became concerned, well, this group comes on and they fix some roads for me and they do some work around the farm. Is that considered a charge? Well, and it was kind of a gray area. And Maryland actually amended its code back at around 2000, 2001, I think, to define what a charge does not include. And that does not include the sharing of fish, game, or meat, or contributions or in-kind services to promote the management or conservation of the property. So this would include things like a hunt club, a group of hunters coming in and putting in food plots or fixing fences or doing some work around the farm. So it gave a lot greater, I think, protection and put landowners at ease with regards to this whole issue of charge. And I would encourage folks in other states that may have their recreational statute and that's not as clearly defined to maybe look at some of that language in terms of legislation for their state to reduce that gray area. Well, you can never be exonerated of liability, but what the statute says specifically is that the owner of land who directly or indirectly invites or permits without charge persons to use the property for a recreational purpose or cut firewood for personal use does not give any assurance the premises are safe and confer upon the person the legal status of an invitee or a licensee. Okay, so they are considered trespassers, of which there is minimal duty of care owed. And there's some other specifications as well, but you can never be absolved of liability. And it does clarify that landowners are still liable for willful or malicious damage. And these are fairly, have to be proven by the person who is injured, but it does give some comfort to landowners. And I think Tom is going to comment more on this because he actually deals with the suits that come up, but you don't see a lot of suits in the state of Maryland, and he'll probably give some insights into that. But so the point is that this gives a lot of protection to private, to landowners as well as public landowners. One of the questions that comes up is, where does the recreational statute apply? And people tend to think about this as a rural land issue, that people hunting and fishing and this and that. But of course, in a case in 2002 before the Circuit Court of Appeals in Maryland upheld the recreational statute in a case that involved a person that was injured in a business park in I think it was Bethesda, just outside of Washington, D.C., in a very exurban area. So the point is, it doesn't apply just to rural properties. At least by this case, it certainly does not indicate that. The big issue here really is to minimize your liability in general, is to always practice risk management. Are there any hazards? Are there any things? Either get rid of them, put up signage, rope them off, or whatever it takes. And that can include a number of different ways to do that, but it brings up this whole issue that regardless, you need insurance. Okay, you need coverage of insurance, and in many cases, it's because there are frivolous suits that come up, and judgments can be sometime awarded, but it's more or less this whole frivolous issue. Now, many people have policies on their property that are covered by their homeowners policies or by their farm policies, and one good thing to do is to make sure that your insurance provider knows that you have people hunting on the property, and if there's no charge, to let them know that, and always encourage landowners to, if there are any risks or any things like that, to make sure that you get rid of them or post them, just to be careful to practice risk management, but to know that most conventional farm policies and homeowner policies do not cover fee hunting. They only cover properties that typically are going to come under the recreational statute. So that's the real important issue here. Just because you have insurance, homeowners or farm insurance, if you're going to charge for hunting, you need to make sure you have the appropriate insurance. And that's what Tom is going to talk about in terms of what that insurance covers, and the real value of it, and typically it's pretty cheap, but it also gives you, kind of like I said previously here, kind of a lawyer on retainer, so that you have someone there that you don't have to worry about these things, as long as you practice reasonable management of the property and working with hunters and so on. So a few comments about developing lease hunting enterprise on properties. Lease hunting is very common throughout the South and the Southeast. It has been for decades. It's becoming more common as we get up into the Mid-Atlantic region now. Many landowners see it as an opportunity. Much less common up in New England, just because of historic land use. Yeah, and smaller properties, things like that. I did a kind of an informal survey of some of our agricultural extension agents in Maryland a few years ago. And they have hunters and property owners to see what kind of values landowners were getting for property they were leasing out. And for deer and turkey, it ranged anywhere from $8 to $30 an acre, which is a considerable amount of money. And you can see that for geese, it could be extremely high. Being in Maryland with the Eastern Shore and the Chesapeake Bay, if you're in a good area for geese, you can receive fairly good income from that type of hunting and leasing. So this can provide a significant source of income. Some of the benefits in general, to summarize, would be that in many cases it can be a reduction in vandalism and better trespass control, and especially for absentee landowners. I myself am an absentee landowner in West Virginia, and I lease my property to a hunt club, and they take great pride in looking out at that property and making sure it's taken care of. And for many landowners, that's the case. So many times the hunt clubs will invest in your property, like I said, in-kind contributions for roads and graveling and things like that. And improved wildlife management. Many people have deer problems throughout Maryland, and this is a way to reduce the deer herd, and again, provide some profitability on marginal farms. Disadvantages probably are that liability status. You are no longer covered by a recreational statute. You need to make sure you have appropriate insurance. There may be some increased time and money, but typically not too much. And it may require some changes in your farm operation, working with a group of individuals to make sure they have access. But this other issue of increased resentment can be a problem sometimes, that people who have historically hunted on the property, and all of a sudden you're charging the hunt on the property, and it can cause some problems. And one way to avoid that would be to perhaps give them the first right to lease the property. That's a consideration. A resource inventory is a good thing to do on your land. You know, mapping out hunting areas, where you're going to let people hunt. Are these going to be, what kind of leases are you going to offer? You may have to do some thinning of the forest on the property, perhaps to improve the habitat for things like deer and turkey. So you have a good cover so that they tend to stay there during hunting season. That's a big issue. You have the good cover, and that can be accomplished through sound forest management. So working with adjacent landowners is another opportunity. There's all kinds of leases. You need a written lease, no handshakes. There's all kinds of leases, short, seasonal leases, annual leases. There's brokers that will actually lease your property for you. Most of the leases I see are typically, long-term or annual leases. But you need insurance, and they need to be properly notarized. And the kinds of things that are covered in a lease, there's a whole list of things in our publication. This is a very short list that goes on for a number of pages. So make sure you have everything in there. There's sample leases in our publication. The University of Tennessee Extension also has some very good sample hunting leases that you can access, and I would encourage you to check those out as well. Marketing the enterprise, again, sometimes you may want to give first refusal to friends and local hunters that have used the property before, but spend your time up front finding the right group of people. Interview them, ask them questions on the phone, meet with them. Once you make a lease with a group, typically they last for many years, and you want to make sure you spend the time up front to find people that you can work with. So anyway, in terms of the recreational experience, something you need to think about. This is people you can provide the best experience possible. So with that, liability insurance is needed for fee hunting enterprises. It's not covered under most farm and homeowner policies. And there's many specialty companies that offer this. The Maryland Forest Association, who is co-sponsoring this this webinar, actually provides liability insurance for hunt clubs for its members. So it's a very good policy. It's offered by Outdoor Underwriters, and our speaker, who's the next speaker, who's an insurance expert with Outdoor Underwriters, Tom Skaggs, will be talking more about that. But if you go to the Maryland Forest Association, I'd encourage you to look at joining, and as a hunt club and as a landowner, and you receive the benefits of their publication as well as the good insurance policy that they offer. So somebody had asked about providing links to the templates at Tennessee, and I would be happy to do that perhaps as a follow-up in the webinar when it's posted. So with that, I want to turn the program over to Tom Skaggs. This is my contact information if you want to contact me directly, but I think I'm just going to switch over to Tom and make sure that we have a communication. We're actually located many hundred miles apart, and if there's questions, you can post them. We can answer them later. But so, Tom, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, so that's a good sign.
All right.
So I'm bringing up your PowerPoint, and you'll be able to take control of your I'm
gonna move back a little bit.
Right?
Yeah. There we go.
Okay.
Well, folks,
thank you very
I'm
much.
Tom Skaggs, and I'm a forester as well, but I've worked in insurance for over 20 years. I'm with Outdoor Underwriters, and the products we provide are geared towards landowners. We originally started over 20 years ago, providing insurance for the large timber companies and paper companies nationally for their just landowner liability as well as the hunting lease liability. And today we still write probably 9 of the 10 largest landowners in the country. But we also provide products for small landowners through our various association programs like the Maryland Forestry Association. And on this first slide here, these are a couple of the different products that a landowner can purchase and or a hunt club. The first being timberland liability, and that is a product and that is just for vacant land. If you are a homeowner, sometimes you can get this type of coverage through your homeowner's policy depending on the proximity of the land to your primary residence. If it's over a certain distance or if the land exceeds a certain number of acres, you are typically unable to cover that under your homeowners, in which case this timberland liability policy would come into play. The hunting club liability, that's, I think, speaks for itself. That's for clubs who lease land from a landowner, and the policy is actually for the club, but you would have the landowner named as an additional insured to protect them as well for the club's activities while on the property. Recreational liability, that's just we have to sometimes craft a specific policy for a recreational use on a property. So if you have you may lease your land to an ATV club or a horseback riding group or things like that, we have to change the policy wording to meet those needs, but those have to be crafted for the particular need, but those are available to landowners. There's also coverage for standing timber if you want to insure your trees, prescribed burning coverage, and then we provide coverages for consulting foresters and wildlife biologists that pick up a lot of the prescribed burning and other exposures, E&O exposures for them. The next slide, this refers to a study that was done quite some time ago in 1995. Things may have changed. I think I'm seeing changes today from this study, but there were 3 significant points that came out of this study, the Hill and Kaiser study. The first is the threat to landowners is probably exaggerated. So I'm going to touch on some of the same things Jonathan spoke about, but I'm also going to give some examples and some experiences that we've had with regard to claims that we've had to defend. I don't want to frighten anybody with some of these stories, but they do occur, but the chance of them occurring to you are not necessarily that great. And if you're in Maryland, y'all have some great laws in place, but I'm going to speak in very general terms because we work all over the country and not specific to Maryland. But you do have good laws in place. And the second point is be familiar with your specific laws. They vary from state to state. We pay claims for some things in some states that we wouldn't pay for in others, just depending on what those laws are. And then lastly, and Jonathan touched on this several times, you always want to incorporate some type of safety or risk management plan related to your land and or the users of your land. Now, negligence is based on, all liability is based on the concept of negligence. There is a duty owed by the landowner to inspect and warn any visitors, protect and warn and inspect and warn any users or visitors of their property. A careless breach occurs when the landowner fails in that duty, and if there's a connection between the duty and the breach, that will lead to damages, which ultimately leads to a settlement. Once again, inspect and warn. Landowners who take money for activities have the highest duty of care to inspect and warn visitors of their property. Now, if you lease your land, and I saw in the survey that I believe half of the folks on this do lease their property to hunters. So if you lease your land, you should always have inspections done. They should follow a routine schedule, do these inspections at least once or twice a year. There are changes to the property. Sometimes those changes are made by the landowner, sometimes they're made by the club. It's always important in your lease agreement to dictate who's responsible for these inspections. They should always be done in writing. And my recommendation, and what I've seen some clubs do and landowners, is they form a checklist so they can go back and cover those same items every year and note the changes. But some of the things we have seen is where a landowner or a club may come in and dig a new ditch and not tell other people that the ditch or a culvert that it's there. So you have someone riding an ATV who's gone up and down that road multiple times, and then they come back after being gone 2 or 3 months and there's a ditch there and they hit it and have an accident. The other thing is gates. If new gates are installed, we've had people hit gates on ATVs. So it's always very, very important to note any changes. You want to inspect tree stands. We have a tremendous number of claims that occur with tree stands collapsing because people don't go in and make the proper adjustments, change the straps, do things like that. Now, Jonathan spoke about the types of visitors to your property and the duties that the landowner has for those visitors. And I'm not going to go into any real detail about invitees or licensees. Of course, invitees are people who pay, such as a hunt club. The licensee is a guest. Some states see a difference between the two, some do not. They see them relatively as the same. But trespassers are where we have seen some significant issues. This is a new category. It's really not. There's something called a known trespasser, and that is if they don't have permission to come on your property, but you are aware of it and you don't take any steps to prevent them, that is what's considered a known trespasser. And in some cases there have been some significant awards made to those people, because at that point they are considered a licensee, because you know they're there and you're not trying to prevent them access to your property. Now, one of the things to do is you want to document that you have taken steps or made efforts to stop those people from coming to your property. At least have a record of having called the sheriff's department, or make sure you have signs posted. In Tennessee, they've recently changed the laws where you don't have to post your property anymore. But the main thing you cannot do is set a trap. And we have had some significant claims where people have set traps for trespassers. They have strung wires across areas where the trespassers have been accessing the property on motorcycles or ATVs. They have dug ditches, things like that. We've actually had some fatalities involved, and they usually involve children who are trespassing, because children are not as cognizant of private property rights as adults are, and so we've had some significant issues where those are concerned. So you cannot set a trap. In some cases we've had issues where people have gates that they have put up and they weren't necessarily setting a trap, but they will use a cable. Well, those cables can be invisible. So if you put a cable or a chain gate up, my recommendation is take it down and put a good gate up where you can see the thing. But if you have a chain or a cable, at least put some PVC pipe on it, some flagging, some reflective tape, and that goes for the post as well. We've had people hit the post on their ATV. But you need to do something to show that you have warned them, whether they're a user of your property or a trespasser, you have warned them of that hazard and they know it's there. Now, on the invitee, inspect property for hidden dangers. Now, that is both on and off the property. So if you have wells, old well sites, or an old well from an old home site on the property, things like that, you always want to warn the users of your property. You also want to warn them of hazards off your property. Always remove the hazard to give adequate warning of the presence. There was a landmark case I saw where some of the folks attending the seminar today were from Pennsylvania. There was a landmark case that occurred in Pennsylvania some years ago that involved a guest. It was not a hunting club, it was a guest. And this he was allowed to hunt on this landowner's property. This person shot at a deer. The bullet went off the property and killed a lady in her kitchen. So he should have been warned of area hazards relating to homeowners near the borders of the property. There was clear negligence involved. The lawsuit was filed against both the shooter and the landowner. and the court ruled that the shooter was 90% negligent, but that the landowner was 10% negligent because they failed to warn the shooter of the nearby houses. So the landowner had to pay 10% of that settlement, and the shooter had to pay 90%. So it's not just the negligent acts that the landowner that might be associated with you as a landowner, but it could be considered the negligent acts of your guests on the property, whether they're a leased club or a visitor to your property. You're responsible for them while they're on the, negligent acts that they may commit while they're on your property. Now, the recreational use statute, I'm not going to say much about this except that states put them in place to encourage landowners to make their land available to the public. A lot of people try to use that don't charge for access to their property use the recreational immunity statute for summary judgment to make cases go away, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. People always claim gross negligence in these types of situations, and we still defend a lot of these. Now, if you're leasing your property, as Jonathan said, you always want to have a written hunting lease. Within that lease, make sure there is some type of hold harmless clause for the landowner, and clearly outline the responsibilities of the club and the landowner. Always have a map of the property detailing the hazards. Now with Google Earth, what I see a lot of clubs do is they'll have an aerial photograph that they've printed out, and on that aerial photograph they'll mark all the gates and all the hazards, the property lines. They'll mark all the tree stands, and it's always a good idea to have a check-in box like what is pictured here, where you know who's on the property and where they're hunting. Number 3 there, insurance for the club. You really need to have insurance for the club. You always want, it's not a requirement that the landowner be named as an additional insured. Make sure, if you are the landowner, that you are named as an additional insured on the policy. That way you cannot be named separately in a suit. The hunt club insurance is not for the landowner, it's for the club, and it's for any negligent acts they may commit. But you can be named in a suit separately if you are not named as an additional insured on their policy. The check-in area, I already mentioned that. That's like the picture you see up there to the right, so you'll know who's on the property and where they're hunting. Always pay particular attention to gates and other hazards. I see I've got a question. In Maryland, you can post your property using blue strips. Okay, that's more of a statement than a question. Now on the next slide here, hunting lease liability coverage. That is general liability for hunting clubs, as I just said, leasing the land. It is designed for the occurrences arising out of the activities and the operations of the hunting club on the leased property. A couple items to be sure that your policy would have is member-to-member coverage, as well as coverage for guest liability. And that's not saying that you're covering, the guest if they're injured, but that some policies don't cover if the guest commits the negligent act. You want to make sure that your policy covers you if the guest commits the negligent act. What if you invite someone to come hunting on your property and they shoot someone? Member-to-member coverage offers coverage if one member shoots another member, but what if the guest shoots somebody? You want to make sure your policy covers that. Also for directors and officers, we've seen some where directors and officers of the club were excluded, and if you have a small club with say 8 members and you're all voting member, you could be considered a director or an officer, which would eliminate your member-to-member coverage or take it away. So there's certain things you need to look for when buying a hunt lease insurance policy. Always make sure the landowner is named as an additional insured and that it's available. Now the timberland liability or the vacant landowner liability insurance, once again, sometimes this can be covered through your farm policy, sometimes it can be covered through your homeowner's policy. What you want to make sure is that it covers incidental hunting exposure. That's what you need to ask your agent. I think Farm Bureau has a pretty good policy, and it does cover incidental hunting exposure. If it doesn't, you might want to look at buying this policy. It's, this stuff is very cheap. You're looking at probably around $145, $150 to buy this type of insurance, and it offers you like $1 million per occurrence with a $2 million aggregate on the policy. And this policy also covers you for trespassers and visitors. So if you have a claim that arises from a friend or a visitor that comes on your property and they're injured, or if a trespasser is injured and they sue you, a trespasser has no rights. I think we've established that, but that does not mean they cannot sue you. And they may not win, but you're still going to be looking at some pretty substantial defense costs. On average, we'll spend $60,000 on defense costs, even when we are successful on these types of claims. Typically, where we see trespass, I'd mentioned this earlier, is when it involves children. If a child is injured, there could be an attractive nuisance or something like that on your property that drew that child to your property. Those are typically where we get involved in cases, and there are usually damages and settlements that are paid on those types of situations. Now, lastly, I want to talk about some of the things that we see and some of the claims that we have to deal with. Tree stands, we see a lot of tree stand claims. Those are our highest frequency. They tend to be our lowest severity because they're, once again, like I said at the start, liability is based on the concept of negligence. If you fall out of your own tree stand, who's the negligent party? You are, and you cannot sue yourself. Now, if I'm a guest and I'm invited on your property and you put me in a stand that collapses, well, that's a different story. ATVs, and they're horrendous. They're horrible accidents. They're terrible injuries on these tree stand claims. But when we say on this slide here the lowest severity, that means we don't pay as much on them because there's no real negligence associated with it. Now, ATVs, that's the second highest in frequency, and it's becoming our highest in frequency, and it is very high in severity. And the reason being, a lot of people put children on ATVs, and I would encourage people not to put kids on ATVs. We have some bad accidents. We've had multiple fatalities involving children in ATVs, and there are usually damages involved in settlements when a child is injured or killed on an ATV. Shootings, those are our lowest frequency, but they are our highest severity. When someone gets shot, there's clearly a negligent act that has been committed by somebody, and those are always pretty substantial claims and pretty nasty ones. I've never seen a shooting claim that made sense to me. We tend to see a lot of them occur at dusk, and it usually happens when somebody breaks a plane. In other words, someone comes up out of a low-lying area and breaks a plane of visibility, or they step into a, say like a power line or an opening, and you've got another hunter nearby. They've heard the noise. They get a little bit excited, and then someone pops out and they shoot them. I know when I come out of the woods at dusk, I've got lights going in every different direction. If I had a strobe light, I'd have it on top of my head. Now, lastly, I call this other, and this involves trespass and carelessness. We have had some significant claims where people just do stupid things. The largest claim we were ever involved with involved a trespasser that we were associated with, involved a trespasser. And what occurred was there was a local swimming hole, and the property kind of came to a point, and there was a local swimming hole, and when the club was not present in the summertime, they weren't there on the property a lot. These folks would come in, they would tear their gates down, rip down their no trespassing signs, and use this swimming hole. And the club just got tired of replacing the gate, replacing the signs, so they just moved everything back, essentially giving them access to that area. And this was on corporate property that was leased by a club. But the club moved the signs, the club moved the gate. You know the story. A guy's been drinking. He gets up in a tree. He dives out into about 6 inches of water. He breaks his neck. He's a quadriplegic. And their argument for this was implied consent, because at one time that property was posted and gated. They moved the signs and they moved the gate, giving implied consent for use of the property. So that was a significant settlement that was paid, well into 7 figures, and but this occurred in a state that nobody I saw here lives in. So I was told this would never happen in some other states, but this particular state has some different kinds of laws that make it very easy to file those types of claims and succeed. We've had some other interesting incidents. One involved a gentleman who was rather a lazy hunter, and he didn't want to have to get out of his warm truck in the cold weather, so he pulled up on the railroad tracks so he could have good visibility up and down the tracks, and he had a little bit of whiskey and took a few sips of that to relax him and keep him warm, and he proceeded to fall asleep. And I think you know the rest of the story. A train comes along and hits his truck on the tracks, and in that particular case, you know, the claimant is the railroad company, because the club damaged the train by having a truck parked on the tracks. So these are things that happen, that we see, that you just don't think about, and every time we think we've seen it all, we see something else. So that's it, unless people have any questions. And I see I've got a couple of questions here. I leased my land to a hunt club. I had one member that hurt his arm moving a wood stove inside the camp. Would I be covered with your insurance policy? The answer is yes. There's something that is on all the policies that is a no-fault provision, and they call it trip and fall insurance. It's listed as medical payment on your policy or on your certificate. MedPay, it covers a flat amount. It does not assume any authority that there's going to be a further claim. It'll say, we will help you with your emergency room bill if there's an ambulance called, but there doesn't have to be negligence involved if in the situation of a MedPay claim. For example, if you step, they call it trip and fall, if somebody steps in a stump hole and hurts their knee, and typically those are limited to either $1,000 or in some cases you can get $5,000 MedPay, but it's a flat payment. It does not assume liability, and it just helps with some medical bills. Secondly, the next question, I allow some neighbors to use my property for hunting and cutting trees. No money is charged. I allow them to keep the tree stands up all year. Do I have liability if someone falls out of these permanent stands? Excuse me, another question came in. I lost my place. Permanent tree stands, whether it is hunting season or not. If they're on your property, you're liable for them. If the person who erected the stand falls out, that becomes questionable. But if someone else comes up in that stand, a guest or a visitor, and they come and use that stand, absolutely. And I tell people to check those stands all the time. I don't know if these are made of wood or they're those lock-on stands where they have the straps, but we have a lot of claims where these tree stands break and fall away from the tree because they don't change them. The trees are continually growing. The straps dry rot over time. Somebody climbs up in there and they break away. We have multiple claims every year with that type of situation. In fact, the extension wildlife biologist had that happen to him this past year at the University of Tennessee, and he has written an article about it because he said when you fall fast, and he is lucky to be alive. But these happen with frightening frequency. But yes, you are liable for stands that are on your property. If the person who erected it puts it up, falls out, that's questionable. But if someone else does, you're on the hook. Next question, is there coverage if the lease has a campfire that gets out of hand. That depends on, there's a provision on the policy that's for fire coverage, and it covers a limited amount of damage to your property. Now once it escapes your property and burns on adjoining landowner's property, that can be a policy limit claim. Now I've seen some policies that will reduce that coverage back to the what's called fire legal, or damage to rented premises, and it's a provision that has a sub-limit on the policy. It can be anywhere from $25,000 to $300,000 I've seen on different policies, but typically if it goes outside of that, it can be a policy limit claim, $1 million claim. But once again, it depends on that particular policy. Sometimes they take it back to that sub-limit, but there is some coverage there, yes. Next question, would you please restate information regarding officers of a hunt club and coverage available for them if they are considered separate from members? This is in regard to the insurance coverage. We don't have that on our policy, but I have seen in one particular case, and it was brought to our attention because there was an insurance agent who was a member of a club, and he saw the policy and he read this and he called us to buy a policy and was telling us about it. But what it did was there was a manuscripted exclusion on the policy that took away the member-to-member coverage for directors and officers. Well, some clubs may have 60 members and there's 10 officers or voting, people that actually run the club. But in some cases, if it is a small club and you've got 5 or 6, or everybody is considered a voting member, that means everybody is considered an officer. There was this exclusion saying that the member-to-member coverage was not awarded to directors and officers of the club. Therefore, you didn't have the member-to-member coverage, and in case you shot somebody, then that coverage was not there. Sorry, I'm looking for the next question. I hope I answered that question. The person moving the wood stove had extensive surgery to replace a tendon. Could he sue me for the rest of the costs, and would this also be covered? He could sue you for the rest of the costs, and if I were involved with this claim, I would deny that. I would pay the med pay settlement for the med pay, whether it be $1,000 or $5,000. If they came for more, saying that they were injured on your property, well, I mean, there's certain amount of contributory or comparative negligence, since they were the one that hurt themselves trying to move something they couldn't move. Now, we would deny that, and we would defend you in that denial. Now, if the judge came back and said you got to pay, then we're going to pay, but we would not voluntarily step up and pay that claim. We would deny that claim, and we would defend you, or defend the club. We would defend the club, and then if the landowner is a member of that club, we would defend the landowner as well, and deny that claim, and then have to pay. If the judge says you got to pay, you got to pay. I will have some of my property forested by a licensed logger in the near future. I know they have insurance, but do I have other issues of liability while they are working? That's a whole nother can of worms. You do. You need to make sure that, and I don't know if you're hiring the logger or if you are going through a consulting forester to do this timber sale. I used to work I used to be a procurement forester. I had several logging contractors that worked for me, and I was responsible for making sure their insurance was all up to date. But they need to have, of course, workers' compensation, general liability, auto liability, and if they use contract truckers to haul those logs off your site, you better make sure those contract truckers have auto liability. And it's important that they post signs where they are entering your property and leaving your property, because we've had some significant vehicle accidents occur at those junctions, and make sure that they keep the roads clean of debris. Anything they do, they're going to be primary. They're going to be the first one's named in a suit, but if they're logging off your property, you could be named in that suit as well. So it could be a stretch, but you want to make sure you're named as an additional insured on their insurance. That way that you're defended under their policy. And if they've got contract haulers hauling off the property, you need to make sure that your logging contractor is named as an additional insured on their policy. I mean, I could talk for hours on that subject. Next question, are there some states or regions that have higher incidence of claims? There are, and it's partly due to the laws, and they're not as strong, and partly due to those states might have more activities on the land than in other states, or there may be more leasing of properties. You know, you don't see as much leasing out in, say, like the Northwest. There's a lot of public land out there, and then a lot of the big corporate landowners get tax incentives to make their land available to the public through state programs, in which case they are very strongly protected by the recreational immunity laws, and typically they have to sue the state and not the landowner when it happens, and they'll sue the state, but in those cases the landowners are protected. We tend to see the greater problems more in the deep south. I won't name states, but we tend to see it more, I'll just say, in the deep southeast, where, and part of that is we have greater frequency because there is much greater leasing in those areas, and because there's a lot of, I think, more deer hunting in those areas, because they have such high deer populations, very liberal bag limits, so you have people in the woods for longer periods of time. In South Carolina, the gun season in part of the state opens August 15th and goes to January 1st, and it's a deer a day. So, you know, you've got a lot of more exposure when you have people in the woods with guns for that great a period of time. Alabama also is another state that has very liberal laws like that, very long hunting seasons and high bag limits. You handle policies for Maryland Forest Association. Have you had any claims from landowners or hunters in Maryland? Not that I can recall off the top of my head, no. That doesn't mean we haven't had some in the past, but right now I can tell you the ones that come to mind over the last 3 to 4 years, no. Okay, would you please let me know the contact info for obtaining the liability insurance policy that cover the issues I asked about dealing with tree stand and the logging? Okay, I can. I think probably the best thing to do would just be to contact me, and I will call you. And I didn't put my contact information up here, which was not a smart thing for me to do. I'm not a very good insurance salesman, I guess. I'm going to type in my email address. T-Skaggs at out, and I misspelled that there, T-Skaggs at outdoorund.com. I don't know how to, I guess that goes, there it is. That's how to reach me. Email me and send me your phone number, and I'll be happy to call and discuss this with you, you know, at your convenience, and kind of direct you where you need to go. The one thing about the logging, I can point you in the right direction. That's not coverage we provide, but I can give you some guidance as to what you need to do to make sure you don't get hammered, so to speak. There's several things you need to take into consideration there. I've only been involved in one really serious claim that the landowner was drawn into, and it involved a vehicle accident, but it involved a paper company, and the paper company hired the logger to cut on company land, who hired a contract trucker who left the land and was involved in a major accident that made national news because they hit a flea market. And it went back
Tom,
to the
I think
logger
we've got,
and ultimately went back to the mill because
I was going to say, it looks like we
money.
We may have one more or a couple more coming in, but let's say thanks for coming by, and we'll
Jonathan,
get a couple of
those
questions coming in. Actually, right now they're just comments, but we'll go ahead and move on because we're getting close to the end of our hour here. And before people take off, we have a little bit of feedback we'd like to get from you. Just a few quick questions, if you would, please. And we will go ahead and see if there are any other questions. But right now, it's pretty much thank you, Tom, and we certainly appreciate your time and expertise today. And thanks, Jonathan, for his help as well. This has been a very interesting webinar. I know I've learned quite a bit myself about a couple of other things. And Tom, if you're still with us, Suzanne has one more question. If you have an existing lease and not the type of coverage that you describe, how do you proceed? Do you go ahead and terminate the current lease, or should she call you quick to get better insurance?
Well, and I don't see the question, but oh, I see. If you have an existing lease, you proceed. I don't know that I would terminate the lease, but you do need to require that the club buy the insurance. Is that helpful? Have Suzanne contact me, email me with her contact information. We can go in more detail on that.
Yeah, Suzanne, go ahead and get a hold of Tom with that. Okay, she'll drop you a line and get a hold of you that way. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the polls here, and we'll get ready to wrap things up. Oh no, Kevin has one more question. It looks like, or maybe a comment. So before we go, we'll see what he has to say, or maybe not. Well, once again, if you have any questions that we didn't cover, you can drop any of us a line. Drop myself a line. Drop Tom a line. Excuse me, or drop Jonathan a line. And if you didn't get them, once again, the webinar is being recorded and it'll be available probably early next month. For those of you who are on our listserv, we will go ahead and send out an email that says exactly when the webinar will be available. But once again, it is going to be available on YouTube at our YouTube channel, so search for Woodland Wildlife Webinars, and you can also find it on our website. That's at extension.umd.edu/Woodland. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us today, and I also want to thank all of our participants who've been with us this spring for the webinar series. We're going to be taking a break for the summer, and we'll be back with another series in the fall. And I encourage you to join us then. And once again, thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.